Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Gaming.com video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. Are Sony considering releasing a successor to the PlayStation Vita? Well, that's what we're going to be starting the video out with, given the latest rumours. Then we're going to move over to the Kaby Lake X line of processors. Intel are going to be discontinuing them. So for the 2 or 3 people who are planning an X299 build around these particular processors, well, you're going to be absolutely devastated. Meanwhile, have Samsung, Micron and SK Hynix been conspiring together to fix DRAM pricing? Well, that's what the allegations of a class action lawsuit are aiming to find out. And then finally, we'll finish the video with Apple and a hybrid AR/VR headset, which is looking to be insane, if of course it really exists. But first things first, I'll invite you to do the standard YouTube thing of subscribing and of course clicking the bell icon, because that seems to be more important than oxygen for many YouTubers. But without further ado, based upon the quote from Sony's FY 2017 financial results, there are rumours currently flying around that we're going to be seeing a 5G PlayStation Portable. I'm going to read out the quote verbatim. By enabling high-speed communication, low latency and simultaneous connectivity, 5G, which is expected to be commercialised in the near future, is a technology which we view as having immense potential, since it can connect all portable devices to the cloud. In order to fully utilise this leading-edge technology, we need to retain that in-house fundamental research capability and capacity to create related applications. By continuing to work on 5G in our smartphone business, we are aiming to develop 5G technology as a competency that can be used across the Sony group, end quote. Now, it's worth noting that although the financials for Sony have been pretty good, especially when it comes to, for example, the purchase of games on the PlayStation Network and the PlayStation business as a whole, there have been a couple of areas which are certainly not exactly where Sony would have probably have hoped. Predominantly, those would be the smartphone business. So if you were to take these quotes and just say, hey, let's take these at face value, it seems that Sony are almost justifying throwing some money into this to then utilize it. Once again, I'm going to read this verbatim. By continuing to work on 5G on our smartphone business, we're aiming to develop 5G technology as a competency that can be used across the Sony group. So if this is true, and once again, your guess is as good as mine as it is, if it is right now, it would appear that there's a couple of things that we can take away from this. The first is that the device itself would not need to be hideously powerful. Most likely, Sony would probably be able to utilize like a low power ARM processor, because it's most likely going to be focused on cloud gaming. That's right, of course, you're going to need to stream data from the PlayStation Network to be able to play titles. This could be rather cool, and at least in theory, and this is me not going with the rumours per se, this is just me speculating, but imagine you have a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 5, I'm assuming by this point, at your home. You could, at least in theory, even stream games from your PlayStation at home to possibly even this device, or perhaps another option, and perhaps a more realistic one, is you would be able to actually use the PlayStation Network to simply play games. So PlayStation Now essentially would be running directly on this device. And of course, because of the sheer bandwidth of 5G, this is certainly something that's very possible. You wouldn't need a high performance graphics processor to run this. It would of course all be taken care of with 5G. All of the rendering would be done on the cloud, all the CPU work would be done on the cloud, so the device you would have in your pocket would be a fairly light device. Cloud gaming isn't particularly new either. I mean, we've seen it at various stages on the PC. Of course, you've got Blade Shadow Box, which allows you to access about 1,500 worth of PC gear, and you can do that for about $30 a month. You've got PlayStation Now, of course. You've got various options from Nvidia. Essentially speaking, the technology is there. It's just going to be evolving over the next several years. That's not to say that they could make the system fairly okay. I mean, ultimately, if you were to boil this Nintendo Switch down to its raw components in terms of performance, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's not anywhere close to, let's say, the Xbox One in terms of raw performance, let alone these, let's say, Scorpio or the PlayStation 4 Pro. But even so, it manages to run things fairly competently. And this could be vital for, let's say, if you're on a train, or let's say you're on the underground, or even let's say flying, because obviously 5G is probably not going to be realistic in all scenarios, and Sony would most likely want to create a value proposition there to at least be able to play certain games locally. Although the Vita was not exactly as successful as perhaps one would have hoped, the original PlayStation Portable was fairly popular. It sold about 80 million units total, which is not too shabby when you really look at it on the grand scheme of things, and certainly it is obvious that the Nintendo Switch is rekindling the love of mobile gaming, and in Japan, of course, mobile gaming is really popular. That's one of the reasons that the Switch is probably killing it in that region. Although it's worth noting that to call the Switch a handheld device only would be doing a grave disservice to Nintendo and the Switch. Perhaps one of the selling points of the system is the fact that you can just simply plug it into a dock, and as we're painfully aware right now, you can do that, and of course the GPU clocks and whatever else improve. Therefore, performance in docked mode does ramp up some. So perhaps we could see something very similar here. But it's also possible that we might not, and because Sony do have a dedicated system in the home, the PlayStation 5, at least assuming it's not been confirmed yet, although essentially we know it is coming. Just to remind everyone, it's going to be Zen based, probably Zen 2 at my guess, with a Navi based GPU. Therefore the onus isn't really on Sony to put in another system out there for, you know, the home necessarily. In fact, it probably would be somewhat detrimental for them to do that, but who knows. With all that said, I'm curious what you think. Would you buy another portable PlayStation type of device, particularly if it was cloud only, or perhaps light on being able to play games locally, or would you prefer to only have a Sony Corporation focused on a home-based system, or what? What's your takeaway? Back in mid-2017, Intel released the X299 platform, and it did so in a rather bizarre way, because not only, of course, did we see processors like the 7820X and the 7900X, which I stand by with our review that those processors, particularly the 7900X, were really good. I would argue, of course, that Threadripper now, especially for the price and value proposition, is probably a better option, but for those who were doing a lot of gaming at the time and just wanted a no-frill system, you didn't have to worry about putting it in, you know, gaming mode or performance mode, or sorry, multitasking mode, and just going for it. 7900 or above were fantastic CPUs, but there was one thing that I did criticize Intel for, and I'm certainly not unique in this, I'm certainly not a snowflake. The i5 7640X and the 7740X were just bizarre. What we had here was a 4-core processor with hyperthreading if you had the 7740X, or a 4-core processor with no hyperthreading, the 7640X. And just why? Just why would you do that? Because if you were to do the, let's say, the Kaby Lake X route, it's not even that the board would grow with you necessarily, because if you were to do this, you only had 2 channels of memory, and only 16 PCIe lanes were available. In short, it's not like they'd made major changes to the processor to fully take advantage of this, and therefore you could purchase, let's say, quad-channel memory, and you would have a really high-performance GPU setup. No, it cuts it all down. So it was just an absolutely just baffling decision. It was one of those processors where it could have been an absolute awesome option to grow with you, but instead Intel just went on a completely weird route with it. So what do we have here? Well, we have this processors being discontinued. It also did not help, of course, that just around the same time, if you look at things once again in the grand scheme of things, the X370 platform launched, and that pretty much meant that you have a higher number of PCIe lanes, you had cheaper processor options, and the platform itself was also cheaper as well. Sure, it only had dual-core memory, dual-channel memory, but hey, that was exactly the same thing as what you had with the Kaby Lake X processors. So Intel discontinuing this, not really much of a surprise, and Being honest, given the leaks we've heard regarding the X399 platform, no, not the AMD one, this time it's Intel, it makes an awful lot of sense, because with X399 that means we're going to get Cannon Lake and Coffee Lake as well. As a slight by the way, I do find this rather amusing, because previously when AMD basically snagged the B350 name, remember that? Now, of course, that's why you've got various Ryzen CPUs and whatever else that, of course, support B350s. Intel instead backed down, if you want to use that term, and went for B360. Now, Intel are not doing this. They are now not really caring. They've just say, hey, okay, well, we've got more marketing might than you, so if you want to play that game, okay, well, we're just going to make everyone think X399 is synonymous with our product. Of course, AMD could counter this because they're going to release Threadripper, and we're going to assume that the new Threadripper is going to have like a new platform, which is going to be X499, but still, them's the breaks. Without question, one of the biggest complaints that we've had in recent last couple of years are memory prices, and memory prices have gone absolutely ballistic. We saw memory prices for DRAM increase 47% during 2017. That's the largest jump we've ever seen in 30 years. And a law firm, Hagens Berman, have filed a class action lawsuit, and this is against 3 parties: Samsung, Micron and Hynix. And this is going to be taking place in the US District Court for the Northern District of California. Now, according once again to the firm's investigations, we have seen these 3 particular memory manufacturers conspiring to limit the DRAM chips produced between 2016 and 2017. And of course, the purpose behind this was to inflate the prices of these particular products. Steve Berman, who is Hagens Berman's managing partner, said, and I quote, "What we've uncovered is DRAM market is a classic antitrust price-fixing scheme in which a small number of kingpin corporations hold the lion's share of the market. Instead of playing by the rules, Samsung, Micron and Hynix chose to put consumers in a chokehold, wringing the market for more profits." Oh, and if you think that this is a company new to this dance, not so much. Back 12 years ago, 2006, the company had actually achieved a $300 million settlement, and Samsung and Hynix actually pled guilty to these charges and paid $731 million in criminal fines, and also served 3,185 days of jail time. That's collective. So the class action lawsuit, for now, that's taking place between the dates of July 1st, 2016 to February 1st, 2018. So if you bought pretty much any DRAM using device, and yes, I said that a bit clunkily, this includes, of course, Macs, iPads, iPhones, or, well, gosh darn, pretty much anything ever produced, then you may be wishing to do a little bit of investigation here. How much money are you going to be getting? Are you going to be getting millions and millions? Well, no, probably not. But still, even if it's just a few bucks in your pocket, hey, it's better than nothing, right? And finally, let's talk about Apple, because they are doing something really cool for once. That's right, I do sometimes come down pretty hard on Apple, but this is one of those instances where I'm genuinely curious to see what the company have been producing. Because according to an anonymous source with CNET, because of course it's always an anonymous source, Apple are working on a standalone AR/VR headset, and this device is not going to be low in specifications. Oh no, 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 no. It's going to be 16K total. That's right, you're using 2 8K displays. And once again, it will be standalone. So just to clarify, this will not need to be plugged into a computer or plugged into a smartphone. Although I'm guessing there's going to be an awful lot of crossover if one desires to pair it with, let's say, an iPhone. This headset, which is codenamed T288, is scheduled for launch in 2020, so a couple of years into the future, but of course development at the moment is still in the very early stages, so plans are still somewhat tentative, so release dates or possibly even a cancellation are, well, on the cards, and release date could probably slip a year or so. If you were to do some Googling on Tim Cook, who is of course the big cheese over at Apple, I don't think I needed to tell you that, he said that I regard as a big idea like the smartphone is for everyone. We don't have to think the iPhone is about a certain demographic or country or vertical market. It's for everyone. I think AR is that big, it's huge. I get excited because of the things that can be done to improve a lot of lives. If you analyse that quote just for a second there, I completely concur with his assessment. The bottom line is, if you can afford a smartphone, and pretty much anyone in a developed country can at this point, and even emerging markets now, smartphones are becoming increasingly cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. The bottom line is, everyone can really benefit from a smartphone. It's kind of weird, and this is harking back a little bit. I remember when I first got my bloody brick, my Nokia, and I was like, am I really going to use this? Am I? I don't know. Am I? Inevitably at the start, not really, because not that many people I knew actually had a smartphone or a cell phone. It wasn't a smartphone. But of course, as phone technology started to evolve and as it became cheaper and as more people got the darn thing, I started to do the texting thing. But by the time I actually got my first smartphone, and by the time I moved even further on to my Galaxy 2 or whatever it was, I don't remember now, I really knew that, you know, smartphones were the future. And it was obvious at that point that this technology was just going to continue to evolve at a rapid pace. And augmented reality, it's still in its infancy. There is still a lot of development that needs to go into it, but it does have a lot of potential. Museum visits, for example, having a map pop up while you're walking down the street, being able to assist doctors or nurses do their job, or have updated information if, for example, you're driving and say, hey, something, you know, there's a crash on the road that you're originally planning, would you like to figure out an alternative route? Or goodness knows, there are so many different potential applications for this, even down to something along the lines of, let's say that your friend was in an accident or had a heart attack right there on the spot. You could, in theory at least, access emergency services and someone could walk you through what to do while emergency responders were coming onto the scene. There's an awful lot of cool stuff with this, and of course it would all be personalized as well, because it's essentially your particular view of the world. It's not monitors anywhere, so it's really cool in terms of application. Anyway, according to the source, the T2A8 would actually go a step beyond making the headset, because there's also going to be a super high resolution screen per eye, but also a dual camera setup. The weird thing here of course, is if you actually take a moment to think about how powerful of a device you would need, because it doesn't typically lend itself to do something like this. I mean, those are the makings of a high-end computer. We expect something like, you know, 2 GTX 1080 Ti's or something to run this type of thing. And according once again to CNET, they claim, according to their sources, that the device will be standalone, but what the source has said is it will also connect wirelessly to a box, and it's using 60 GHz WiGig, whatever that means, and what they're saying it connects to. And that box will be driven by a proprietary Apple chip that is supposedly being built on a 5nm architecture, which is kind of weird because right now Samsung were investigating the development of a 7nm processor, and Apple currently with the iPhone X is using an A11 Bionic processor, and that's 10nm. So, according once again to Apple, sorry, the source, Apple are planning on using technology which is not, you know, currently on their roadmap, or at least currently available or thought to be on their roadmap. So, what's my opinion on this? Is it real? Well, it's really down to your imagination. I think it's probably something that is being at least considered by Apple, and this is being very generic in my thought process, but let's just be honest. Apple as a company are worth a lot of money. that's putting it mildly. So one of the criticisms Apple have had from both investors and the tech industry at large is that they've not really innovated. So perhaps Apple are considering doing this from the perspective of, hey, even if this technology does not necessarily go into this particular device, and this is not a product that necessarily ships and finds its way on store shelves, some of the technology could be used on other devices, and that also, in terms of the research costs, could help to offset it. Anyway, with all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. and bye for now.